Chairman O's fingers were still wrapped around Nora's wrist when Tae-young slammed his glass down hard enough to crack the table. The sound cut through the private dining room like a gunshot. 12 men froze mid-conversation. A waiter halfway through pouring soju stopped, the bottle trembling in his hand. "Touch her again," Tae-young said, his voice flat, dead calm, terrifying in its stillness. "And I will kill you myself." Nobody breathed. Chairman Sung-min-oh did not let go of her wrist. He turned his head slowly, almost lazily, toward the man who had just threatened his life in front of every lieutenant in the syndicate. A smile crept across his face, not one of fear, but of amusement, the kind a man wears when a child has said something he finds both foolish and interesting. "Careful, boy," Oh said, his thumb still pressed against the inside of Nora's wrist. "You don't even know what she is." Nora stood between them, spine straight, face unreadable, heart slamming against her ribs so hard she was certain the whole room could hear it. She said nothing. She had learned a long time ago that silence was the only armor a maid was allowed to wear in a room full of armed men. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. 3 months earlier, Nora had arrived in Seoul with 2 suitcases, a fake employment history, and a memory of her father's voice that she replayed every night before falling asleep. She had taken the position as live-in maid to Tae-young Baek because his household sat 2 floors below Chairman O's penthouse, and because everything she needed, dates, names, shipping manifests, the names of men who had died so that Sung-min-oh could keep climbing past through that building at some point. She kept her head down. She learned the rhythms of the house, which lieutenant liked his coffee black, and which one liked to be feared more than liked, which door creaked and which one didn't, who drank until they talked too much. She spoke Korean fluently, but let them believe she only understood simple instructions. It made men careless around her. Careless men talked. Tae-young Baek was not like the others. She noticed that within the first week. He didn't raise his voice at the staff. He didn't let his men make comments when she walked past. Once, in her 2nd month, a drunk lieutenant named Min-jae grabbed her arm at a house gathering, laughing, telling the other men to watch how the foreign girl would react. Tae-young had crossed the room in 4 steps and pulled Min-jae's hand off her wrist so fast the man stumbled backward into a table. "She works in this house," Tae-young had said. Quiet and sharp. "That doesn't mean she works for you." Min-jae had apologized. Nora had said nothing, only nodded once and gone back to clearing plates. But that night, lying awake, she had thought about the way his hand had moved, not slow, not hesitant, like a man deciding whether to intervene, but instant, like a reflex he didn't examine. She told herself it didn't matter. She was not here to notice things like that. But she noticed anyway. Weeks passed. Small things accumulated between them the way small things do: a cup of tea left outside her door on a night she couldn't sleep, a torn hand she had bandaged after he came home from a job with his knuckles split open, neither of them speaking while she worked, both of them very aware of how close her hands were to his skin. Neither said anything about it. There was too much at stake for either of them to say anything about it. At night, when the house was quiet, Nora made calls in Igbo to a number in Lagos, her voice low, her words fast. On the other end was a man named Emeka, the only person left alive who knew who she really was and what she had come to Seoul to do. "Have you gotten close to O's records?" Emeka asked one night. "Not yet," Nora whispered, standing at her window, watching the lights of the city stretch out below her like a field of dying stars. "He barely comes to this house." "He'll come," Emeka said. "Men like O always come looking for what belongs to someone else." She hadn't understood what he meant until the night O finally did come. It was a dinner, arranged to celebrate a shipment that had cleared customs without incident. 12 men, Tae-young included, gathered in the private dining room of the penthouse, Chairman O presiding at the head of the table like a king holding court. Nora had been assigned to serve that night, a decision made by the head housekeeper, not by her. Though later she would wonder if fate had simply run out of patience waiting for her to make a choice. O had watched her from the moment she walked in. Not the way the other men watched her, not with hunger, not with entitlement, but with something colder. Recognition, the particular, unsettling stillness of a man trying to place a face he had seen before in circumstances he could not quite recall. "What is your name?" he had asked her midway through the meal as she refilled his glass. "Nora," she said. "Nora," he repeated, testing the shape of it in his mouth. "Where are you from?" "Nigeria," she said. "Lagos." Something moved behind his eyes. Small, fast gone before anyone else at the table would have caught it. But Nora caught it, because she had spent 3 months learning to read every flicker on every face in that house, and what she read on Chairman O's face in that moment was not curiosity. It was memory. He reached out and took her wrist, not violently, not even roughly, but with the deliberate proprietary confidence of a man who believed he was entitled to touch whatever he wished. He turned her arm slightly, exposing the inside of her wrist, where a small, irregular birthmark sat just below the base of her palm, shaped faintly like a crescent moon. "I knew a man once," O said quietly, so only she could hear, "who had a daughter with a mark just like this. He used to joke that God had signed her like a painting." Nora's whole body went cold. "His name was Chukwuemeka Obi," O continued, still holding her wrist, still smiling. "You wouldn't remember him. You were very young. Perhaps 6. 7. The room around her seemed to tilt. She kept her face still through sheer force of will, the way she had trained herself to do for 3 months, for 3 years before that, for her entire adult life since the night her father had not come home. "I don't know that name," she said, and her voice did not shake, though everything inside her was shaking. "No," O agreed pleasantly. "I imagine you wouldn't." His thumb pressed once, lightly, against the crescent-shaped mark, as if confirming something to himself. Small world. That was the moment Tae Young slammed his glass down on the table. That was the moment the story began. The room stayed frozen for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 3 seconds. O finally released Nora's wrist, and she stepped back instinctively, putting distance between herself and both men. Though her mind was screaming at her to run, to disappear, to become nobody the way she had been trained to become nobody whenever a mission collapsed around her. O rose slowly from his seat. He was not a large man, but he carried himself like one, the way certain men learn to occupy more space than their bodies actually require. "You raised your voice to me," O said, almost gently, "in front of my own men. Do you understand what that means?" "I understand exactly what it means," Tae Young said. He hadn't moved from where he stood. His hands were steady at his sides, but his jaw was tight enough that Nora could see the muscle working beneath his skin. "Then you understand you've made a mistake tonight that cannot be unmade," O said. "Maybe," Tae Young said. "But you'll remember it was you who put your hands on someone who works in my house first." A few of the younger men at the table exchanged glances quick. Careful. The kind of look men give each other when they've just watched something shift that they don't yet fully understand but know matters. O noticed it too. Nora watched him notice it, watched the calculation move behind his eyes, weighing how much authority he had just lost in this room and how quickly he needed to reclaim it. "Get some air." "Tae Young," O said finally, his voice cooling into something more dangerous than anger indifference. "We'll discuss your insubordination when you've remembered your place." Tae Young didn't move for a long moment. Then he looked at Nora just once, just briefly, and something passed between them that neither of them could afford to name in a room full of men who made careers out of noticing weakness. "Come with me," he said to her. Low, she followed him out. They didn't speak until they reached the private elevator that connected the penthouse floor to his residence 2 levels below. The doors slid shut. The silence between them was so dense it felt physical. Why did you do that? Nora finally asked. Because he had no right to touch you like that, Tae-young said. That's not an answer. You know what he is. You know what happens to men who challenge him in front of the others. I know, Tae-young said. Then why? Because I've watched you for 3 months, he said, cutting her off, his voice rougher than she'd ever heard it. I've watched every man in that house look through you like your furniture, and I've kept my mouth shut because it wasn't my place, because you never asked me to say anything, because I didn't know what would happen if I did. But tonight I watched him grab your wrist like you were something he owned, and I couldn't. He stopped himself. His hand tightened into a fist at his side. I couldn't just sit there. Nora stared at him. The elevator doors opened onto the quiet corridor of his floor, but neither of them moved to step out. You don't understand what you've done, she said quietly. Then explain it to me. She almost did. She almost let 3 months of silence collapse right there in that elevator, almost told him everything: her father's name, Lagos, Emeka, the documents, the reason she had learned to walk through his house like a ghost who saw everything and remembered all of it. But some old, hard instinct stopped her. The same instinct that had kept her alive this long. Just be careful, she said instead. Please, if you're still watching up to now, type "I'm enjoying it" in the comment section. Word of what happened at the dinner spread through the syndicate before the sun rose. By the following evening, the story had transformed the way stories always transform when they pass through frightened men looking for meaning. Some said Tae-young had drawn a knife on the chairman. Others said he'd struck him. Others whispered that this was the beginning of a war that had been building for years, ever since old Chairman Bayek, Tae-young's father, had died under circumstances nobody discussed too loudly. What was true and what mattered was this. A fracture had opened in the syndicate, and men were already lining up on either side of it. The younger lieutenant's men who had grown up under O's increasingly brutal, paranoid leadership, men who had watched him execute 2 of their own over minor disagreements in the past year alone, began gathering quietly around Tae-young. Not openly. Nobody was foolish enough to declare loyalty out loud yet. But in small ways, a nod held a beat too long. A warning passed along about which of O's men were reporting on whom. A lieutenant named Ji-ho, showing up at Tae-young's door late one night simply to say, "Some of us remember what your father built. Some of us are tired of watching O tear it apart." Tae-young hadn't asked for any of it, but he didn't turn it away either. Meanwhile, Nora made an emergency call to Lagos. "He knows something," she told Emeka, pacing the small room she'd been given, keeping her voice below a whisper even though she'd checked twice for listening devices. O recognized me. He said my father's name. There was a long silence on the line. "Then, it's happening faster than we planned," Emeka finally said. "Nora, listen to me. You need to finish this now, while there's chaos, while O is distracted by the fracture with the bake boy. Get into his private files. Get the shipment records, the names, everything connecting him to your father's death. We can move on him within the week if you get us what we need. And if he moves on me first, then you disappear tonight." Emeka said, "We have a route. You don't need to finish this if it costs you your life." Nora closed her eyes. She thought of her father's face, blurred now by 15 years of memory wearing it smooth like a stone in a river. She thought of the last thing he had said to her before he left the house that night and never came back. "Whatever happens to me, promise you'll remember who did it." "I'll finish it," she said. She hung up before Emeka could argue. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat by her window, turning over every fragment O had let slip, every detail that might lead her to the records that would finally prove what she had spent half her life suspecting, that Sung-min Oh had orchestrated her father's death as part of a business arrangement between his syndicate and a corrupt shipping cartel in Lagos. An arrangement that had made Oh wealthy and had left a 6-year-old girl standing at her father's grave without understanding why. A soft knock came at her door near 2 in the morning. She opened it to find Tae Young standing there, still dressed, clearly having not slept either. "I keep thinking about what he said to you," Tae Young said without preamble. "About knowing your father. That wasn't a threat pulled out of nowhere. He knew exactly who you were before tonight." Nora's stomach dropped. She had underestimated how closely he'd been paying attention. "I don't know what you mean," she said. "Nora," his voice was quiet, but there was something pleading underneath it now, something raw. "I put my life on the line for you in that room, without even knowing why I was doing it. I think I deserve the truth." She looked at him for a long moment, this man who had defended her without calculation, who had risked everything he'd built in that syndicate on instinct alone, who was standing in her doorway at 2 in the morning not asking her to explain herself out of suspicion, but because he was afraid for her. "If I tell you," she said finally, "you can't unknow it. And what you know can get you killed. I already threatened the head of the syndicate to protect you," Tae Young said. "I think I passed the point of safety a while ago." She let him in. She told him everything. Her father, Chukwemeka Obi, a shipping logistics manager in Lagos who had discovered that a Korean syndicate was using his company's routes to move something far more dangerous than the cargo listed on the manifests, how he had threatened to go to the authorities, how he had disappeared 3 weeks later, his body found in the harbor, ruled an accident by officials who had clearly been paid to rule it that way, how Nora had grown up in her aunt's house hearing whispers that never turned into answers, until she was old enough to go looking for the answers herself, until Emeka, an old friend of her father's, now working intelligence for a rival organization with its own reasons to want O destroyed, had offered her a way in. Tae Young listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening more with every detail, his hands curling and uncurling at his sides as though he needed somewhere to put the anger that was building in him. "He killed your father," he said when she finished, "and then he let you become a maid in a house 2 floors below his own." "He didn't know who I was until tonight," Nora said. "I made sure of that. I changed everything about myself to make sure of that. And now that he knows, now I have days, maybe less." Tae Young was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. The softness from earlier had hardened into something colder, more decided. "Then we finish this together," he said. "Tae Young, he already thinks I've betrayed him," he said. "I have nothing left to lose by making it true." The days that followed moved fast, the way days always move fast right before everything breaks apart completely. Nora used her access to the penthouse's private study access she'd spent months quietly earning to photograph what she could of O's older shipping records, the ones that predated the current, cleaner paper trail he kept for the syndicate's newer, more cautious generation. Tae Young used his growing influence among the younger lieutenants to learn which of O's men were still fully loyal, and which had simply never been given a reason to leave. But O was not a man who waited to be outmaneuvered. 3 nights after the dinner, Nora was pulled from her room by 2 of O's personal guards and brought to his private office at the top of the building. Tae Young was already there when she arrived, held between 2 more of O's men, a fresh bruise blooming along his jaw. O sat behind his desk, unhurried, a folder open in front of him. "I had my men go through your employment records again," O said, not looking up. "Curious thing. The company that placed you here doesn't exist. Hasn't existed for 6 years. He finally raised his eyes to meet hers. "You're very good, Nora, or should I call you by your real name? Nora Obi. Daughter of a man who tried to ruin my business 15 years ago and paid for it accordingly." Nora said nothing. There was nothing left to protect by denying it now. "I should have had you killed the moment I recognized that mark on your wrist," O continued, almost conversationally. "Sentiment is a weakness I usually don't indulge. But I found myself curious how far you'd let this go, whether you'd actually try to finish what your father started." He closed the folder. "And now I have my answer, and I have a traitor standing beside you. So I suppose the curiosity has served its purpose." You murdered him, Nora said, her voice finally breaking through the composure she'd held for 3 months. My father did nothing but tell the truth about what you were shipping, and you had him killed and dumped in a harbor like he was nothing. He was a logistics manager who thought morality was worth more than his own life, O said flatly. I gave him every chance to look the other way. He chose not to. Choices have consequences. Nora, you of all people should understand that by now. Let her go, Tae-young said, straining against the men holding him. This is between you and her father's ghost. She's not the enemy you think she is. Oh looked at him with something almost like pity. You broke rank for a woman you didn't even know the real name of. Do you understand how that looks to every man in this syndicate? Weak, compromised, unfit to lead anything. He stood, walking slowly around the desk. I was prepared to let your insubordination slide as youthful foolishness. But now I see it was never foolishness. It was betrayal, dressed up as chivalry. It was never betrayal, Tae-young said. You lost my loyalty the day you started treating this organization like your personal kingdom instead of what my father built it to be. Something shifted in O's expression, the first genuine crack of fury Nora had seen from him. Bring them both to the main hall, he said to his men. Everyone will watch what happens to those who forget their place. The main hall filled quickly, every lieutenant, every soldier O could summon on short notice. All gathered under harsh light to witness what O intended as a public lesson. Nora and Tae-young were brought to the center of the room, forced to their knees, while O climbed the small dais at the front, addressing his men like a general before a battle. Tonight, O announced, you will watch what happens to disloyalty in this organization. Baek Tae-young broke rank to protect a spy sent by enemies who murdered Sari, whose father I ordered removed 15 years ago for threatening this organization's interests. He has compromised everything his father built for the sake of a woman who was never who she claimed to be. A murmur moved through the crowd. Nora could feel Tae-young beside her, tense, furious, calculating something she couldn't read. I want everyone in this room to understand, O continued, that mercy is not something I extend to those who choose enemies over family. Tonight, Baek Tae-young dies for his betrayal, and the woman dies for hers. 2 of O's men stepped forward, weapons raised. This was the moment. Nora understood, with sudden, absolute clarity, that there was no more time left to protect anyone, not herself, not the mission Emeka had sent her to complete, not even the fragile, dangerous thing that had grown between her and Tae-young over 3 months of careful silence. Wait, she said, her voice carrying across the hall louder and steadier than she'd expected. Before you kill me, at least let your men know exactly what they're killing me for. O's eyes narrowed. Careful, my name is Nora Obi, she said, rising slightly despite the hands trying to hold her down. My father was Chukwuemeka Obi, a logistics manager in Lagos who discovered that Chairman O was using civilian shipping routes to move weapons into conflict zones across West Africa, weapons that killed hundreds of people. Weapons that funded this entire syndicate's expansion for over a decade. My father tried to report it. Chairman O had him murdered and made it look like an accident so that none of you would ever have to ask where your organization's money actually came from. The room had gone utterly silent. Everything he's built, Nora continued, looking now at the younger lieutenants, at Ji-ho, at the men who had quietly gathered around Tae-young in the past few days. He built on the body of a man whose only crime was refusing to stay silent. And now he's about to kill a man for the crime of refusing to stay silent too. Enough, O snapped, but his voice had lost some of its command, and every man in that room could hear it. You said choices have consequences, Nora said, turning to face him directly. You're right. This is yours. For a long suspended moment, nobody moved. Then Ji-ho stepped forward, placing himself deliberately between O's armed men and where Nora and Tae-young knelt. Is it true? Ji-ho asked O directly. The weapons. The routes through Lagos. O's silence answered the question more completely than words could have. My cousin died in Sierra Leone 3 years ago, another lieutenant said quietly from the back of the room. We were told it was an accident during a supply run. How many of us have been funding this without knowing what it actually was? Jiho said, his voice rising now, addressing the room rather than O. How many of our families have blood on their hands because we trusted this man to tell us the truth about where our money came from? O's men, the ones holding weapons on Nora and Tae Young, hesitated, looking toward their superiors, toward O, toward each other, uncertain for the first time in years about which direction obedience actually pointed. Lower your weapons, O commanded. Nobody moved. I said lower your weapons. Still, nobody moved. Tae Young rose slowly to his feet, pulling Nora up beside him, and faced the man who had led this organization through fear for over a decade. You built an empire on lies and blood, Tae Young said, and you thought none of us would ever notice as long as you kept us comfortable enough not to ask questions. But you just told an entire room full of armed men that you'd kill any of them the moment they became inconvenient to you. Do you really think they're going to forget that? O's composure finally cracked entirely. He reached for the weapon at his side, a desperate cornered motion, the last move of a man who understood, in that instant, that his authority had already evaporated the moment the truth left Nora's mouth. Jiho moved first, disarming him before the weapon fully cleared its holster, forcing O to his knees in the same spot where Nora and Tae Young had knelt moments before. The syndicate that Sung Min Oh had ruled through fear for over a decade did not fall in that instant because of violence. It fell because the truth, once spoken aloud in a room full of men who had spent years choosing not to ask questions, could not be unheard. In the weeks that followed, the organization fractured and reformed under new leadership, with Jiho and several of the younger lieutenants working to dismantle the weapons routes that had funded O's rise, cooperating quietly with international investigators to ensure O would answer for what he'd done not just to Nora's father, but to hundreds of families across 2 continents who had never known where their tragedies truly came from. Nora finally told Emeka the whole truth over a phone call that lasted 3 hours, and for the first time in 15 years, she allowed herself to cry while telling it. Tae Young stayed by her side through all of it, through the investigations, through the danger that lingered even after O's fall, through the slow, uncertain process of 2 people who had spent months protecting each other from a distance, finally learning how to stand close without needing a reason to justify it. I still don't know what I am to this organization now, Tae Young told her one evening, sitting on the balcony of an apartment that finally, for the first time since she'd arrived in Seoul, felt like it might actually belong to her. You're the man who chose to do the right thing when it would have been easier not to, Nora said. That's more than most people manage in an entire lifetime. He reached for her hand, and this time neither of them let go. This story carries a truth worth remembering, that silence protects the people who do wrong far more than it ever protects the people who stay quiet, and that the truth, however long it's buried, always finds a way back to the surface. It's about a father's love reaching across 15 years to protect his daughter, and about a man brave enough to risk everything he'd built for a woman he barely knew, simply because it was the right thing to do. Thank you so much for watching until the very end. We hope this story moved you the way it moved us while we told it. Let us know in the comments what part you enjoyed the most, and if you haven't already, subscribe so you never miss the next story.